Greetings to you wherever you are under the sound of my voice. This remains the Pan-African Drive on Teledar TV with me, Tony Michael Howard, your host. And it remains a platform that is meant to inspire and motivate the current generation of young Africans in the actualization of their respective dreams, preaching the message of peace and national unity, as well as revitalizing the Africanization policy that speaks about good governance, social justice, democracy, human rights, and most importantly, the African unity. Remember when I say, until the Africans learn to own their own problems, find their own solutions, they won't be able to write their own stories. That's the essence of the Pan-African Drive, owning our own problems, finding our own solutions to be able to write our own stories. And for tonight's edition, it's a beautiful opportunity to be speaking with two of the brightest minds of the African continent from the southern part of Africa, in South Africa and Eswatini, formerly Swaziland, and Professor Mncube, not forgetting Professor Agreement Nyembe. They're going to be speaking with me tonight on what I call democracy versus military regime or military revolution. Where do we go as a continent and people? I bring them on tonight on the show. Welcome back here on the show. And like I said, we have two powerful men in the world of academia from South Africa and Eswatini. They're going to be speaking with us tonight on democracy and the military regime. Welcome to this platform, Dr. Melusi and Professor Nyembe.
I'm very honored to be in this show tonight, and I'm greeting all Africans in the continent and beyond. Greetings.
Thank you, Dr. Melusi. Can we hear from you on the show?
Greetings to all the global viewers and listeners. Thank you for having me on the show. And always remember that Africa's revolution is global and will remain global. Thank you.
Of course, I cannot salute both of you enough for appearing on the show tonight to ensure that you enlighten the minds of young people in shaping our continent to the kind of way we desire, as initiated or pioneered by previous Pan-Africanists that lived before us. To those of you watching us in the diaspora and the national support of the Gambia viewership to the Teledar TV, we say thank you so dearly much. In the absence of your support, there is no Teledar TV. Prof, tonight, I speak with you too on what I call democracy and versus military revolution or regime. When you take a survey across our continent, you've seen a wave of coup d'etats in several quarters of the continent. And most importantly, we operate on democratic values, but because of a lack of democratic dividends, minority groups, individuals, masses, the population we see in Madagascar have seen that there is a need to turn a new leaf and give power back to the people through military regime. What's the best way forward for our continent? Do we stick to democracy, or is it important that we take a new leaf? Dr. Melusi.
Look, any system that satisfies people and that is chosen by the people at a certain historical point in time is very, very important. No human system per se is stone. It's not like physics or chemistry. So given, if I audit the present global situation right now at the moment, it's very asymmetrical. We have a superpower, one of the biggest contributors to the United Nations Charter that continuously now breaches international law, for instance, by extrajudicially killing Gaddafi. Look at Libya, it's a mess. 2003, remember what happened to Iraq. Now, right now, they went into Venezuela, a sovereign state. They are announcing to the world that we do not care about democracy. What rules is might rules. So what I'm saying, nothing wrong with democracy, but the whole world now is asymmetrical. It's in a constant flux. So as Africans, we must listen to all African thinkers, be they democratic thinkers, military thinkers, whatever. And after we trade our ideas robustly, given the situation that is there, we craft what is best for our people. Thank you.
And when you say what is best for our people, what is best for our people?
For instance, what is best in Burkina Faso? There was a so-called democratic state, but now everybody knows beyond no shadow of doubt, the person who had been put there was a front for global capital for France, for United States, for NATO, right? They decided, the people of Burkina Faso, as a test case to take him off. So they took him out and the military took over there. So they cut off this whole wastage of time of parliamentary democracy, whereby if you come with a bill, they first have to contest it and all that. There's nothing wrong with that. But at a historical point in time in Burkina Faso, they are doing what is best for them there, and it works, and the people of Burkina Faso supports them. Now, comparatively globally.
In essence, you subscribing to military regime in Burkina Faso and for the rest of the continent, so to speak. Professor Nyembe, do you subscribe to doctors' assertion that a military regime should be the way forward for not just Burkina Faso, but across the continent? Do you subscribe to that?
No, I do not. Afrobarometer, they did a study. They found that 66 of Africans still want a democratic system. We should not say democracy does not work in societies where democracy was never applied the way it's supposed to be applied. Because the problem that we must understand is that an individual needs freedom and liberty for them to prosper. When the elites take over or capture political groups and they go to power, that is not democracy. Because when the general public is not really participating fully in a democratic process, then they come up with faulty governments. But it does not mean democracy is faulty. A military in a society is a tool for that society to bring peace and stability. It is not the function of the military to govern countries. Countries must be governed by the people, elected by the people, with the mandate from the people. It cannot be a mandate that is got through the gun. Anyone who thinks of a coup should form a political party, should contest elections, should put forward an argument, policy alternatives that people will then vote for them. They should not shortcut this, because then they end up saying that some few people or individual think better than the rest of the society.
Dr. Melusi, you've listened to Prof. He says that in as much as we've had glitches in a lot of democratic exercises across the continent, but it's still important that people be given the liberty to choose their leader. So he subscribed to democracy and not the military revolutionary regime that you speak of, which Burkina Faso has been one of the exceptional stories when it comes to the dividends for the masses. What do you have to say to that?
Let me make something very clear. Since Africa decolonized, after colonization, Africa has never had true democracy because we've been subordinated by a financial global system under the US reserve currency. So we've never had, and we've had to take the dictates of the International Monetary Fund, we've had to take the dictates of the World Bank, and we've had to take the dictates of the most powerful military in the world, the American military. So what Africa has been having is what I call a facade of democracy. And I'm not saying democracy in the African sense before colonialism never existed. Probably, yes, we can go to that. And I want to correct what you say, Mr. Host, is in terms of me supporting military, that could be transitionary. You debate all ideas. I'm saying at this point in time, Burkina Faso, if you compare Burkina Faso and what is happening in Palestine, in Gaza, and what is being commented in Gaza by the people who formed a board for peace, who call themselves Democrats, right? What is happening? There is a genocide in Gaza. There is no genocide in what you call in Burkina Faso. And what the military actually did there is to stop that genocide. And there is exponential development that is taking place in Burkina Faso. Literacy rate has gone up. Industrialization is taking place. They are getting a fair price for their uranium on the global market. They were getting 80 pence per pound from the French. Now they are getting 245 US dollars. That is a change. Nobody can fault. Nobody can fault in Africa. Even the African Union can fault Burkina Faso's military for pillaging people, for killing people, like what is happening in Gaza, like what is happening in Sudan. So that is transitionary. I think as and when people, when they feel now, think the ship has steadied, now we can discuss about a new type of political system that has to rule Burkina Faso. But for the moment, and another area where I want to differ with the professor a little bit, everybody in the democracy must govern, including the military. That is the military, the police, and intelligence, and the people, and Chapter 9 institutions. It's how you do the governing. Because the military, police, and intelligence are very, very, very critical to the polity of a country. You cannot do them away. Yes, they must be in line with the people, but you cannot say the military and intelligence and the police, they are not part of that democratic polity. They are definitely part of that democratic polity. And yes, there must be an oversight with it. And I think that's what Professor Nyembe is saying. But when we reach a transitionary period, that could be dangerous. Look what Iran is going through now. There's a whole lot of saber rattling around Iran that they want to destroy that state. A country that possesses nuclear weapons is telling Iran cannot have nuclear weapons. Who the hell are they? A country that has nuclear weapons wants to tell Africa cannot have nuclear weapons. If Africa wants to have nuclear weapons as a deterrence, you understand, it's their democratic choice to do that. And there, I agree with Professor to say that. But let's not play a dangerous game and say the military is not important, because that's your last resort that defends the state. Yes, there must be rules how the military must engage with the society, but you cannot discard the military, intelligence, and police. No, you cannot. They are part of the democratic state. But for now, you can see what is happening in Burkina Faso. You can see what's happening in Niger. You can see what's happening in Watchcall. The people are not saying these people, these soldiers that have taken over are murdering us. They're not saying that. But in Palestine, they're saying that. They are saying Americans.
Let me hold you there for a moment. Professor Nyembe, you listen to Prof, you listen to Dr. Melusi. He's saying that in our democratic exercise, the military should not be exempted. They have to be involved in the day-to-day activities of the governing process of the state. That will be outside the details of democracy, because the military as an institution has its responsibility far from the day-to-day running of the state, outside the security and protection of the state. Do you subscribe to Doctor's position?
Type of thinking is what is making Africa actually a problematic area, because people want to violate the principles that are supposed to govern in a democracy. In a democracy, the army is a tool of the elected people, and it is a tool for the state to achieve peace. In the 5 functions of a state, which one of them is to provide for peace and stability, where the army is used for that purpose. The army's purpose is not to be part of the governance. The governance, there are 3 organs of state. It is the legislature, it is the executive, it is the judiciary. The army is under the oversight of the executive, using a legislation that has been created by the legislature. Once the army wants to govern, that is a dichotomy of democratic principles. That is the problem with Africa. Problem with Africa is that we agree to lie to ourselves about our history. We forget and try to discount other things. For instance, in Burkina Faso, we do not have enough time for us to judge the state, because what is happening in Faso is not for the first time in Africa. That's what Museveni did when he took out Obote. The people in Kampala were in the streets thinking there's a messiah. When time goes on, things goes the other way. So that's what happens if you have a government and a person who cannot be controlled. Eventually, those who dissent from his own view, this honeymoon that the Burkina Faso people have will eventually come to reality, that you cannot have a nation that is controlled by the mind of one person. That sooner will be a problem. We cannot say one development there, one change there creates an overall achievement. It is too early to say that. And also, in a democratic society, there's no reason why the Burkina Faso people could not negotiate for a share price. You see, I hate these talk in Africa where they keep on saying there's an overlord over us in terms of our sovereignty. But when we want to use our army, we want to to oppress our people. We want to take the political thinkers to prison and to give them high treason. We then use the sovereignty card when the other countries in the world say you are doing wrong. We must understand this thing. We must be very clear. We cannot make Gaddafi a superior person. We must remember the Libyans that he publicly executed after the Libyans in 1997 did say they want a change of government. They want a change of government. We must speak of Africa the truth. There are things that other leaders did well, but there are things that they did bad. Libya, even the problems they face, the critical part that have created instability was that they did not create an institutional, a people who can take over. We have African leaders that think they will never leave power. So they never empower institutions in the country, so they become the only people. That's what happens in Somalia. That's what happens in Libya. If Libya had institutions, political parties, that problem wasn't going to happen. So when people do good things, they must not think that their good thing, it will last with them. They must empower the Africans. The Africans must be empowered as a people, not individuals.
Let me hold you there,
Thank you.
Professor Nyembe. There is a beautiful conversation here on the Pan-African Drive on Teledar TV. Those of you watching us in the diaspora, we appreciate your support constantly on this very platform and show and our TV as well. Please, your likes, comments, and analysis are very important. Dr. Melusi, you listen to Prof. He gave a strong example of Yoweri Kaguta Museveni of Uganda. In 1986, when he came to power, one of the messages, or the key message he sent was that the problems about Africa is that leaders come to positions of authority and entrench themselves. Today, his position in that country, even though he's been voted for quote-unquote democracy or so, but he came as a military leader. And he's been there for 40 years now. Those who were 6 years old at the time, they are now 46 years old. How do you reconcile your positions of a military regime in Burkina Faso? And the Prof has said that it is too early to rate Ibrahim Traore. No disrespect to his massive progress, so to speak. What do you do? What do you have to say to that?
Look, with the state of the world and with the state of Africa, there's nothing like too early or too late. You do it all the time. You do an audit all the time. Then you have a plenary audit if we want to look at a certain situation. I think me and Prof, we are on the same page. And I think sometimes it's a question of semantics, but because we are discussing this, exchanging these ideas intellectually, yes, we can differ. But I want to preface my argument by saying there is no human system that cannot be audited. And when you audit any human system, whether it's communist, whether it's Ubuntu, whether it's your own microfamily, whether it's democracy in the American sense, whether it's democracy in the British sense, in the Yugoslavia sense, in whatever sense, any human system can be audited. And why do you audit? Because you want to find weaknesses. Why do you want to find weaknesses of any human system or any system of governance? Is because you want to grow from your weaknesses and become stronger. So in that sense, I think me and Prof, we are on the same page. Yes, I'm not saying at all that Traore is perfect. I'm not saying at all that I'm perfect and Prof is not perfect and the host is not perfect. Even all the viewers are not perfect. Yes, probably what the Prof is saying, on a balance of probabilities, anything you do a cost-benefit calculus, and at that historical point in time, you take a leaf of what works in that point in time. So my argument was to the Prof, Burkina Faso, when Traore took over, because the country was suffering from terrorism, that's another day. I know what's going about terrorism when the Americans come in there as AFRICOM and the French come in there. They play a double game. They are actually the ones who are pushing that terrorism. And the people who are in the military and military intelligence, that's another way of governance that I wanted to tell the Prof about. Yes, when you govern in a democratic state, in a civil, when you spoke about organs of governance, even in parliament itself, follow committees on the treasury, on military, where they call you and say, Commander, come and answer, because that effectively shows they are there in governance. But yes, there is different nuances of governance, but they are all forming position of that country, whether that country is or in South Africa. And yes, there can be dissatisfactions because any human system can. At a historical point in time, for instance, if Trump, what he did in Venezuela, wants to do the same thing in our intelligence governance, if our intelligence, because we work, let's say, with the Chinese, and they tell us we have full proof, we know it because America is planning to invade you, South Africa, in the next intelligence. We can intelligence, not to tell the public, but we begin to get ready. And how do we counter what America is going, what they tell in Venezuela? If that is part of governance, we know because civilians are not trained in that type of governance. So when Prof about all those types, he's primarily the civilian part, professional part of the three tiers of government. He is right, but the army is involved every time.
Allow me to hold you there. Allow me to hold you there a bit. Let me hear from Professor Nyembe. Professor Nyembe, doctor has said that you two are speaking on the same page, just that he's giving a bit of leverage to the military, especially when democratic exercises are not being judiciously done, so they can step in. Do you subscribe that you guys have a common Vatican argument? There should be any element of provision in a democratic exercise when democracy is not working well, the military should step in. Do you have any room at all for the military to step in at any point in time as exceptional case or cases?
We must understand the fact that democracy does not have a period where it is not working well. It's when democracy is not applied properly that there's a problem in society. Democracy does not work well. It is when it is not applied, or sometimes when greedy people like the Trump cohort that have taken over government, then there is a problem and interlude. In the United States, if we look at the different epochs, we can look at the epochs of the American Revolution, that when those Americans who in principle decided to not benefit from slavery and other things and actually rose and time created democratic state in its imperfectness as a growing project, when Abraham Lincoln came, where he has to fight slavery, which was a beneficial to the Americans. That part will show that people who are principled are the people who are supposed to drive democracy. But every day there is a conflict between the good and the bad. The bad people in society tries to put down democracy, and democracy have to continuously be fighting. But in other systems, you find that the bad people are actually governing a country, and then they suppress people. So when I was talking about the fact that the military cannot govern, the military is not designed to govern. It is designed to assist society to achieve peace and stability under the leadership of the elected people. Now, what does that mean? It means that a military is exactly as the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of what? It is part of the implementation of the policies and the laws of the legislature. That is very important. Intelligence is applied in order to provide information on the threats that the state is facing, so that the politicians can make a decision. How then do we do that threat? You see, in the Republic of South Africa, during Mbeki Zuma administration, they had a vision of modernizing and professionalizing the South African army in such a way they had a very creative procurement process that was going to make the South African army more equipped and better. But then the politics of South Africa started dealing with the issue of Nkandla, in with Zuma, and then that program became secondary, which then put the state at threat now to deal with this type of threats that we have. For instance, the issue of Venezuela. I understand the politics and I disagree with Trump and everything. But at the same time, I am saying the competency of the Venezuelan state, the government there is at question. Is at question that their intelligence, their readiness for repel was not demonstrated. We have to look at that. Africa, We are not building our armies. We talk about NATO, but we're not building our armies. We're not producing the weapons we're supposed to in us as universities. We're not getting the research so that we can produce this technology that is needed for us to remain competitive in a global world. This is very important in Africa, that we are talking about things sometimes that are of no significance.
Thank you, Prof. I get back to you, Prof. If you listen to the expositor for Professor Nyembe, he's telling you that he has no element of subscription whatsoever for military intervention in any democratic process or exercise. I come back to you. I hail from Liberia. And back then, when we had a Samuel Kanyadu, I think you must have heard a story in 1980 when he took over. Most Liberians felt he was a safe haven for the state. As soon as he took over, the first thing that he did was to do what I call the execution of 13 political figures that he felt threatened about. There was no justified reason. He just felt uncomfortable with them, and he executed them in cold blood. You had a case of a Valentine Strauss of Sierra Leone in 1994 when he took over. 26 civilians that served in the previous leadership and military personnel as well. He executed them on the beach, so to speak. After just 8 months of his governing process. So these are the risks. And when military institutions take over, you have the suspension of constitution, which remains the inalienable doctrines of the masses to be protected by. So how do you reconcile a military intervention in a democratic state with all of these risks from previous experiences, like I mentioned?
I keep on prefacing by saying, in any governance, you always do benefit calculus. The system at all times. I mean, gentlemen, let's agree we're living on planet Earth, not in an area where there's total. So I agree it's a question of mitigating violence, all right, or mitigating the mistakes of any government. It becomes better and better. But to think that will have total peace, that will never ever happen. And as an area where I want to disagree with Professor Nyembe, America has never, ever been a democratic state. From when it began, it's a white male racist state. Number one, they had as a value system, they went into America and they genocided over 58 million native Red Indians. That's why even up to date, they can genocide people and it doesn't mean a thing to them. After they did that, they were continuing with slavery. I can go into reasons why Abraham Lincoln stopped this type of slavery. It was just sugarcoating. Now, from the time CIA was formed, right up to now, if you go look at the history of CIA, under every American president who was a slave owner, no exception, even Lincoln himself, go and re-look it properly. All of them were slave owners. All of them enjoyed the profits of free labor of black people. Lincoln including himself, because when he went into that power, there were people funding him with free labor money of the slaves that built America. So America, right up to now, the job what CIA, Central Intelligence, has done to Africa from the first day America was formed, right up to today, there is no democracy. America sells you a facade of democracy, a facade. There is no democracy. Actually, America is a military state, which the professor doesn't like, and is actually a racist military state. You have a president of the United States of America, when children are being murdered in Gaza, he says, we will take over Gaza and build a Riviera and even own it and make it very beautiful. In the 21st century, you have a president of the most powerful country talking like that. Memory for Africans is very, very important. I hear this talk that we must forget what happened to us in Africa. No, we mustn't forget. It keeps our intellect sharp. It keeps our factoring into our geopolitical sharp. You cannot be a people who are thriving to be a superpower, who are thriving to be a better Eswatini, a better South Africa, or a better Liberia if you do not know your history. How can you engage in a workplace when you do not have a background where you've worked before? It's very, very important. America is a very, very determined, very diabolical state. That's why they did what they did. If, like the professor is saying, the shortcoming in Venezuela, who the hell are the Americans to go there and disregard sovereignty and go and kidnap against
For
Who the
purpose of
hell
the
are
show,
they?
I want
Who
us
the
to
hell are
moderate
they
our
to
tone,
play in media?
our choice
Who
of
the
words,
hell are they?
to match, because this is just meant to build bridges between and amongst Africans, and I want us to use most African context to contextualize our system here on the continent, then going outside the shows of the continent. So I will hold you there,
Let me
Prof.
come.
When we have our first break, once we would have returned, then we pick the rest of the conversation from there. Is the Pan-African Drive here on Teledar TV. We'll take a and catch you shortly. Welcome back. This remains the Pan-African Drive, a platform that meant to build bridges between and amongst Africans, wherever you are in the diaspora or here on the continent of Africa. And it is with me, Tony Michael Howard, Island News Socrates. I have two powerful minds in the areas of Pan-Africanism, in the Dr. Melusi of the University of Johannesburg and Professor Nyembe of the Amadi University of Eswatini. Welcome back from the show, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Prof,
And if you
just
allow
before we
me,
went for the break, Professor Dr. Melusi, before we went for the break, I spoke on the need to moderate our tone, our choice of words, so that we do not go outside of context, so to speak. I come to you, Professor Nyembe. You speak so highly about democracy.
Can I say something very quickly? Can I say something very quickly?
Let me hear from you quickly.
Right. My tone of words, I don't think there's anything wrong that I've said. For instance, if I say, who the hell are they? Right? I'm matching exactly what the presidents of other countries talk about when they call Africa a shithole country, when they call it a hellhole, right? When they call Somalis, who are Africans, when they call them garbage. And this language, when you say somebody is garbage, is disrespectful, but you are not necessarily going outside the ambit of engagement, of a rhetorical, of a robust engagement. There's nothing wrong with that. And I would like to say to you, the host, respectfully, there is nothing wrong with my language. We cleverly, tactfully, and strategically have to match the temperature of what is going on. Because if you have a people that are genociding people in Sudan who are Africans, they are being, today, there is no state of Sudan. And we can't be talking properly without showing emotion and the suffering and the spirit of what they're going through. That has to be demonstrated, regardless of what anybody else will say. If I have to differ with you, the host, on this, I will differ with you. I will not temper the anger of our people,
Okay.
of what.
Doctor, let me hold you there. Let me hold you there a little bit. Doctor, let me hold you there a little bit and get to Professor Nyembe. Professor Nyembe, you see, Dr. Melusi is getting a bit emotional about the issues of Africa. I understand where his frustration comes from, and I think you understand where his frustration comes from. But I come to you in the era of democracy, which you've created no space and no room whatsoever for military intervention and the African leadership or governing process. I wouldn't want to take a side, but how do you reconcile the positions of the democracy in democratic exercises or processes? The rigid executions of the law, because of the three layers of government. The legislative branch of government makes the law, and the judiciary interprets the law, and you have the executive enforcing the laws. But then when there are decisions taken, let us say impromptu or quick decisions about development or state affairs, it has to go through that rank and file. It has to go through that rigid bureaucratic process or processes, which hindered or slows the entire exercise. But in the military area, when military leaders are in positions of authority, their decisions are quick, they're fast, and so to speak. How do you reconcile that?
You see, one of the things that I always talk about is that you must realize that there's no individual who is smarter than the rest of society. Even if you go to corporate, if you have a very autocratic leader in a corporate, that company does not survive for too long. It will do well, but is not going to be here 100 years or 200 years from now on. It is when everyone within that company participate in management meetings and make collective decisions. Because something can look correct now. When somebody is falling from a high-rise building, from the floor 50. If he's on 40 and you ask him what's happening, he says it's well and fine. At 30, well and fine. They only die when they hit the ground. So sometimes things have an illusion of looking like they are moving forward when they are actually not. Because also a society that is developing, but at the same time creating an undercurrent of a civil war that will happen, which will destroy everything that they have done. It's a waste of development. It's just a mirage. So in a democracy, if you are going to build things, even if you build them slow, but they are going to be sustainable, they are going to be there. And then also, Prof, America is not our example of a democracy. There are countries in the world that we look at. We look at Canada, we look at Sweden, we look at Finland, we look at those countries. America is not the yardstick. So people like bringing in the Americans as if they are the only people. The Americans have said that their democracy is a unique one. But anyway, us as Africans, we must apply the principles of democracy for it to make a judgment. Where democracy is not applied, you cannot have elections the way they have them in Zimbabwe and then say there's democracy. You cannot have election the way they have them in Tanzania and say there's democracy. So democracy is not defined by one criterion of election. It's defined by a series of criteria that will say it's a democracy. So until we give it, you see in the countries where democracy is working that we don't talk about, we do not talk about South Africa in its governance. We don't talk about Namibia. We don't want to talk about Botswana. We don't want to talk about the countries where democracy is working. We pick up the one or two countries where it is not working, and then we multiply and amplify that. Democracy is working in Africa because Africans are human beings. You see, these wars we talk about, the genocide that's happening in other countries, it doesn't mean it didn't happen in Africa. Mfekane was a serious genocide that the Zulus did impact. Everywhere in Africa, in Western Africa, when the Arabs were coming in to colonize us before the Western came, there were genocide there. So genocide is a human bad element, evil element that democracies tries to remove from human beings and try to bring forth what is good in humankind.
Dr. Melusi, do you want to react to Professor's position?
Yeah. Again, I think me and Professor were on the same page again. I said any human system can be audited, because there have been bad systems in Africa, anywhere part of the world. Number one, why I spoke about America, because he started coming up with the thing that America is good, has had democratic leaders, and putting Abraham Lincoln on a pedestal, whom I think personally was a racist, and he was enjoying the free loot of free labor of slave money. There we can agree to disagree. And so I mentioned America because he mentioned it. Now I want to also mention the countries he's talking about, the Sweden, all those countries, they belong to NATO, to North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And one of the reasons why NATO was created, it was not only to protect Europe, it was to keep a tab on Africa, that you will stay under the arm of the pound sterling, under the arm of the US reserve dollar currency. You have to understand how Africa is subordinated by force, economically and otherwise. NATO is part of it. That's why when Gaddafi, with all his mistakes that you mentioned, and that I agree, he has weaknesses like I have weaknesses. When he went out of line, NATO went in there and killed thousands of innocent people, and ultimately extrajudicially killed Gaddafi against breaching international law. The very countries you're talking about, you mentioned, the Sweden, they're part of NATO right now as we speak. So it benefits them because they subordinate Africa, and they benefit from our surplus reserves that they export into their country with a debt system that happens. So all these countries in Europe, historically and otherwise, they are not free. And I'm not saying us as Africans, we do not have our own mistakes. Yes, we do. When you do an audit, when you do a SWOT analysis, you look from the endogenous that happen inside and exogenous outside. So even the countries that you mentioned, I'm now mentioning them, right? There is nothing wonderful about Sweden. There is nothing wonderful about Norway. And if you say they are democratic, right now, they do not want any Muslims to be wearing these things that cover their faces. Norway and Denmark have just said that, and they call themselves democratic because we live with different cultures, right? So all of them are responsible. And you're right, when you talk about the Arab slave trade also, which Gaddafi apologized for, right? They are not. So I want to say, I will repeat again, we do an audit, we look at ourselves as Africans, and we also look outside. Why I spoke to you when we spoke about America is because America is one of the most powerful countries. So sometimes we don't just speak about them just because it's America. No, because in every facet, whether we like it or not, they've had an impact, but they're now declining, but they're still very powerful and they can cause a great mayhem. So sometimes we default to them, we benchmark them in certain economic issues, not because they are great. China has actually beaten them on a purchasing power parity on other economic issues. Number three, another one I want to direct to the host. Host, we are not robots as Africans. We are human beings. We are beings of emotion. And I want every African, because they carry the DNA of our forefathers who were abused in slavery, colonialism, and continuing colonialism, like what's happening in Sudan and all these wars that are going over in Africa. We are showing our own knowledge system, our own imagination. The anger when they throw their bombs on our people, when they rape our people, these imperialists, when these bombs are being raped on our people, our children are screaming. When they're being starved, they are showing emotion. And it's high time for Africans to be who they are. There is no need, as long as you're not being rude, to be cut and proper and to think that we are robotics and we don't show. We are sentient beings. Sentient beings means you show your emotion, whether you are falling in love, whether you are about to go to sleep, everything is an emotion. And this thing about the Africa's drive, we cannot talk as if Africa right now is very powerful. It's not. We are in a very serious existential situation, which is not a laughing game anymore, right? We do not have a deterrent. What does it mean when all these 5 countries, from America to England to China to India, they're all in the United Nations Security Council? Security Council, it's a nuclear club. And every time we want to do it, we are told we cannot do it, and we remain exposed, right? Having your sovereignty is not a romantic thing. You must be able to defend it like Russia. And when we talk about Africa, it's not just we are just running away to other countries. There is no way you can talk about the United Nations of the world without talking about Africa, because all the economies of the world are being fed by Africa. So when I benchmark, I will benchmark every country in the world. My thinking will not be channeled by Eurocentric type of thinking. It is my thinking, it is my lived experience, and every African must speak their lived experience, whether we agree or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Doctor. I respect and value your thinking so dearly, much like I respect and value the rest of the Africans out there. I am the host here, and you are totally valued, and your point is respected. Professor Nyembe, Prof, in his exposé right now, he made a statement. He says that Africa is at existential threat. Do you subscribe to that? And if yes, what would be other substantial validations to substantiate what he just says, that we are at existential threat? Do you believe that?
Well, but anyway, before I go that, let me state this fact. Abraham Lincoln did not have slaves, and he was a very poor person. He educated himself in law, and he had very problems, and he worked as a grocery person for some time, and he lived in the part of America where there were no slaves, where they were actually helping in liberating slaves from the south as they move into the north. So these types of assumptions that we keep on hearing from people who do not read deeply of what history is like, it's a problem. Africa, like any other place, it does have threats that are to it. But the other that we have is to assume that Africa is a hegemony, that we are the same. Each nation in Africa have their own interests, their national interests that they must pursue. For us to be united, we must be responsive to the national interest of each of the Africans. You see, I'm in the south of Africa, and I travel to Europe, and people keep on asking me about music in Morocco, which I do not really know because it's not played in our radio waves. So then this look of people of looking at us as Africans as if we are a hegemony. It's also the false assumptions that makes it difficult for AU and others to come up with viable viable solutions to the problems that we are facing. And also this thing of us of saying the way we think NATO is, and then we think it is the truth. It makes us sometimes not able to deal with the problems that we have, because the problems we have in Africa is about us not developing ourselves in such a way that we become a continent or nations that are of significance. Because our military, our intelligence, our security forces, our judiciary is used more to deal with who differ from us when we are in government. Our intelligence, our military doctrine is internally looking. It is not externally looking. And that becomes a problem. When we acquire weapons, the weapons are for grand showing in Independence Day, just to make our presidents look scary to us, the citizens, not to external. So these policy things we need to talk about, and they are informed by these false assumption that the world out there is wanting to attack us, and then we keep on dealing with these phantoms instead of building ourselves up. So it's very important, when you find a modern country like South Africa that is developing, and then you find this huge number of citizens that are trying not to say to the government, you are doing well in A, you are doing well in B, but they always amplified what they do not like. South Africa is a good example. In terms of a social democracy that is able to deal with its poor people, which is able to try and get those jobs done, and it is frustrated, but it is getting there. And now Trump has shown our weaknesses and our vulnerabilities. I think South Africa and others will start to deal with that fact that we do need to think about how do we create this fencing of who we are. Because I said to that the issue of sovereignty is a card that governments play when they want to oppress us. But when they are not oppressing us, they keep on then saying sovereignty. I do not believe that a state like Nigeria, with resources, with educated people, is unable to solve its own problems. There's something that needs to be done. We have incompetency, or we at the universities, we are not training African leaders, African administrators the right way. And one of them is maybe we are confusing principles.
Dr. Melusi, you listened to the last argument from him that university lecturers or teachers or trainers, so to speak, of tertiary institutions or even at the infancy level are possibly not doing the job well in terms of molding the minds of Africans to take up responsibilities, the values of leadership, governance processes, and so to speak. Do you feel guilty of that as a professor who is also in the classroom?
I'm glad we're having this robust debate and exchange of ideas with my esteemed Prof. He's also once again raised my ire when he keeps on protecting people who enslaved our people, like Abraham Lincoln, who had to uphold the racist constitution of the United States of America. For instance, I'll give you an example. It's not an assumption. For instance, Trump keeps on saying, I've stopped 8 wars. He says it all the time. Go on YouTube. He says it all the time. And he wants a Nobel Prize. Which 8 wars has he stopped? Right. These are things that imperialists keep on doing. And it's the same thing with Abraham Lincoln. So he was put there by certain interests to uphold the racist Constitution of the United States of America. Yes, we can agree to disagree, which is fine, Professor Nyembe. Number two, when we say our people are being murdered in Africa and we talk of NATO as a phantom, it's not a phantom. What happened, the dismemberment of Libya against the international law by NATO, it's not a phantom. They flew there and they bombed people. And there are still people trying to put cases at the International Court of Justice against NATO. Right now, even when Burkina Faso took over, all the European Union countries, right up to now, go and check it out, they put sanctions against Burkina Faso, Mali, and the other last country. Right now, the very same countries, Sweden and Norway and Denmark and Poland included, the countries that you are protecting. Right. And you ask us to read deeper. I also thank you for asking me to read deeper, because knowledge doesn't end. I will read deeper. But equally, as you are pointing that to me, also read deeper. These historically, right up to now, they are there in that power. Africa is not a question where we just talk about Africa and you say national interest. Of course, we look at national interest, but Professor Nyembe, there is no scale. If you look at Lesotho, if Lesotho has to talk to China or America, there's no scale. There is a reason why after we do a SWOT analysis and we do an audit, which I keep on speaking about, why Africa decided to come together, not even now, even during the liberation struggle. Right, at a certain point in time, after we did an audit, the people like the Adedejis, Professor Adedejis, he was an economist. After they did an audit, they found it necessary that we must have an organization of African unity. This is not fantasy. It's an organization. You have scale, because when we integrate, right, we can harmonize our resources. It might not be perfect. Then in 1963, there was Organization of African Unity. And within that Organization of African Unity, there was the Organization of African Unity Liberation Committee. Because I was in exile myself, I'm one of those who fought, right? It was responsible in a very tiered manner to say now we are assisting the liberation struggle of Mozambique. From Mozambique, we go to Zimbabwe. From Zimbabwe, we go to Namibia. Then lastly, it's not something that they just said. It was articulated by the intellectuals like the Nyerere of then, under Organization of African Unity. So what it does, it deconstructs what yourself saying, as intellectuals, we must just look at sovereignty. Yes, we can look at it at a bigger scale because we have to have deterrence. Organization of African Unity was there. Then in 2000, we felt that, and I was part of those involved, we felt that that is not a fantasy again. We felt that Organization of African Unity has certain weaknesses. After an audit, it has to graduate to suit the global times to become the African Union. And the Constitutive Act of 2002 was formed, and Gaddafi was one of those. This is continental, and it has done good work. For instance, I'll tell you what they've done. For instance, we now have the African Continental Free Trade Area, which also encompasses Eswatini, South Africa. We are trying to intra-regionally to try to become one block, because our economy, even the Nigerian one you're talking about, is dominated by the Americans and the Europeans. Go and look at the petrol right now. Who has the intellectual property rights on the oil of Nigeria? It's not Nigerians. All the deals in Nigeria are dollar denominated. Same in South Africa, same in Eswatini. And what do I mean by dollar? Yes, Eswatini, you might have your currency. But I can tell you, as day follows night, I know because I'm involved in these issues. Eswatini, when they want to buy goods from America, which they do, when they want to buy goods from Israel, they will not take the Eswatini currency. They must have the US Reserve Dollar or the yuan, right? When you do the exchange rate, now the Eswatini is weaker. They have to get the stronger, then they pay more. That's what happens. And if that is not slavery, and if we cannot see that is slavery, that's why after political independence, we're trying to come into economic independence. So, Professor Nyembe, don't say it's fantasies when you talk about things like...
Doctor, let me hold you there. Let me hold you there a little bit, Doctor. All of the arguments you put on the table, all of the subscription you put on the table still expose Africa's vulnerability. It further validates your argument about being at existential threats with the rest of the world. And Professor Nyembe has taken responsibility that school-going teachers, lecturers, professors like yourselves possibly are not doing your job well in molding the minds of Africans with education that goes to the body, heart, and souls of your students. To what extent do you feel guilty of this as a classroom professor?
I want to give myself as an example, and many others that have come before me, and many others that are there today. Myself as an example, right? I'm a result of South African education, personally myself, right? So if you have that education, again, I keep on going back to what I'm saying. You take an audit. Can you hear me?
I agree with Prof that school-going lecturers, trainers, and professors should be guilty of not molding the minds of young Africans to be developed into leaders or potential leaders that will exercise the requisite democratic dividends for their people. Do you agree first with that?
No, I don't agree. It's a broad statement. There are professors who are guilty and there are professors who are not guilty. Come on, be fair. Be fair. You are making a broad statement. There are professors in schools in South Africa who are very, very for colonial deconstruction. And there are those who support the capitalistic system, the racist system, and all that. Yes, I agree. That's why you do an audit. And when you do an audit, you do a SWOT analysis. You look at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. But now, how should I agree with the professors and say every professor? Maybe even Professor Nyembe is not like that. Maybe Professor Nyembe is a revolutionary. How can I paint everyone with one plate? It's very unfair. Even if there's one professor, right? Even if there's 5, actually, I know many of them. And I know even some in other African countries who are in jail who speak for the people, who fight for the people. So you cannot paint everybody and say everybody's. No, it's not. It's not true. If that's what you are echoing and you are supporting what the professor is saying. No, some, yes, professor is right. There are some who are apples.
Okay.
And there are some.
Doctor, I hold you there. Let me come quickly to, we're running out of time. Let me come back to Professor Nyembe. Professor Nyembe, we've discussed the constraints, the challenges, and for also have come to a conversation that speaks about whether we should go for military leadership or democratic leadership should remain. That means there is something wrong with our democratic process. What is your advice for African leaders in terms of filtering leadership so that it serves the people adequately well? Professor Nyembe, what's the position? What do you have to say to African leaders?
African leaders should allow democracy to flourish, because when democracy flourishes, the best of us actually comes forward. Sometimes we will run to bad peoples, but at least we have a date to take that person out of power and change it. You see, the people who have proper democracies, they do have a date that they can remove people. You know, in Malawi, they may not be developing economically very fast, but the Malawians, they always have an opportunity to recalibrate the Malawian society or the Zambian society or the South African. The South African give us a very good example to say that when a party is not delivering to what the people want, they will punish that party. I think the ANC have learned that. It is early for them to learn, like the Indian Congress, which took longer, but they did learn that lesson. But also I wanted to say that as Africans, we need to be truthful. We cannot minimize when the African person is oppressed by an African leader that we love, and then we minimize that oppression and that pain. Like in Libya, they are minimizing the suffering of the people of Benghazi. They are minimizing the thousands of youth that died because Gaddafi took them to jail and shot them in the streets when they wanted a democratic expression. Let's not minimize that, because every African is very important as an individual. Let's not maximize those people that we love because they say certain things. You know, we need to have dignity in Africa of an individual African. Every African must be able to be free and live in liberty.
Dr. Melusi, we're running out of time, please. Just like I said to Professor Nyembe, for also have come to the conversation where we should be discussing between two governing processes, that means something is wrong with our leadership. What's your words to African leaders in ensuring that they execute their function judiciously so that the right dividends are accorded to the people who elect them?
I would like to say to African leaders in Africa and globally, those who are committed to the people, who are serving the people, big up and keep on doing that. And amongst us as African people, there are African people who are the comprado elite, who are selling us out, who have funds put in France, in America, and elsewhere, and who rush quickly and tell the CIA and foreign intelligence what's happening in Africa. Those must be dealt with. Hence the audit I keep on speaking about. And Professor Nyembe is right? We are not minimizing everybody else, but we are not perfect. And yes, but people must know what is happening right now in the 21st century. It's very asymmetrical. It's now might is power, and Africans must be very ready to sacrifice themselves because it's going to get very, very messy in Africa and globally in the world. So, to those who are fighting for every African, I support you. And to those Africans who are doing other Africans down, they must be shamed and they must be dealt with. There, I support Professor Nyembe, yes.
Okay, I give you 30 seconds, Professor Nyembe, to speak to your people in Southern Africa in your native language. 30 seconds, your final words. So people in South Africa, the remaining 30 seconds for the rest of Africa in English. So use Southern Africa 30 seconds and 30 seconds replicate the same message for the rest of Africa. Speak to your people there in South Africa.
Ngibonge ukuthi ngitholile lethuba lokuthi ngikhulume lokuthi la eAfrika kufanele sibe nahulumende welinengi, singabi nahulumende wemasotsha. Emasotsha akube ngulabo labasebentela kokuthi kube nokuthula, phindze kube nokusimama emaveni. Asante sana, ngiyabonga kakhulu.
Replicate that in English language for the rest of the continent before I take leave of you, sir. For the rest of the continent in English language.
I was saying that I'm happy that I was able to talk on the issue of democracy, saying that we must allow people to govern themselves as they wish in the way that they want, that the military must remain in the barracks and do its job of ensuring there is peace, there's stability, and then so that there's prosperity in society.
Dr. Malusi,
Thank
please
you very
speak to your
much.
people in your language 30 seconds and then replicate the same message in English language for the rest of the continent 30 seconds, sir.
Dr. Malusi Mncube amandla awethu ngifuna ukubonga nonke ngifuna ukubonga Professor Nyembe ngifuna ukubonga host wethu nama South Africans abasemzansi masibambe bantu sibambane economy yethu not only of South Africa because we trade with each other yonke siphumelele siba abantu abansundu abaphumelele eAfrica nemhlabeni wonke phahlalala.
Replicate that for the rest of Africa, the English language, please, sir.
To all South Africans, I'd like to thank you, and also I'd like to thank the host, and I'd like to thank also Professor Nyembe, because we are brothers, and because we are also part of the conscience of society. Me and Professor Nyembe, we love each other, but when it comes to ideas, we must fist fight so that the best comes out of it. So the military, everybody must be involved, and at a certain point in time, everybody must be united. Africa must unite. I say to everybody, the African Continental Free Trade Area must be a success. African Union must be a success. Wherever you see a weakness, every African must fix it. And lastly, I want to say in South Africa, it's time now for 2029. The African National Congress, EFF, MK, IFP, PAC, AZAPO, all black majority political parties must come together for the 2029 election. That way we'll have critical mass to change South Africa and to change Africa. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the global viewers and Siyabonga. Thank you.
It was a very beautiful experience having you two on the show tonight, and we hope to have you some other time again. To those of you who are watching on social media, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, we'll say massive salute to your support. Like, share, and comment, and make your analysis of the Pan-African Drive. For also have come to this conversation about where we're going to be choosing between the forms of government for Africa means something is wrong with our leadership. It is important that we go back on our democratic table so that we look at the clauses that bind us to understand that leadership is about service to the people. So once you are giving the mouth of authority to the steady affairs of a nation, you are accountable to the people. You must ensure that the right democratic dividends is afforded them so that they do not suffer. It's with me, Tony Michael Howard, CK India Socrates. Catch you some other time if you like. Bye-bye.